Hello, Damien here from Spark Angels again. Today we're going to do something different. We're going to be doing a charging port on an iPad Air. So the charging port is obviously soldered on the back of the device over there. It's all soldered down. So we're going to resolder a new one on today. My colleague David will be doing the actual repair itself, and I'll just be filming it all and doing his voiceover as best I can. So obviously, if you want to comment on this video, asking any questions about the board level, the soldering work, you're more than welcome to. Obviously afterwards you can comment on it as well, and we'll answer whatever questions you've got. Right, so we'll get started by first showing you that the charging port is not working. Obviously you have to take the board out of the device first, just so you can get to the back to be able to do the soldering work. So we're just going to plug a battery into the main board, then we're going to plug a charging port into it, and then show you the amps that are going through it to show you that there's no amps going through it at all, which means the charging port itself isn't working. So if you want to go for that, David. So plug the charging port in, and over here we've got a little reader, and that is showing 0.07, which means the charging port is not charging properly. Okay, there we go. It's nothing. Obviously it's still all connected down, but it's showing a 0 reading. Right, so we'll now proceed in changing the charging port. Right, so I'm going to first start off by using some Kapton tape. So we'll put some Kapton tape over the board just to hold it in place. Obviously Kapton tape won't absorb, well, won't make the heat go past that, and it won't melt due to the heat. That's why you use Kapton tape. Right, so we use a hot air station. I'm just going over the soldering points, weakening them all so we can obviously take it all up. At this point, he's just taking off the little tab that is covering the soldering points. So there we go. That's the tab peeled off. Now you can see all the soldering points underneath it. There you go. Alright, so we're using some Chip Quick to pretty much put on, so just it's soldering wick that you can just put on to low melt, which means we can put it on top and it'll just loosen all the solder on it. Just means we can take it off easier without putting too much normal solder over it. Good. Sorry. Right, so we're just putting some flux on it as well. I'll put it over there. I'm going to put it over here. No? Okay. Put the soldering iron you reach over there. You can put it over here. It's fine. Right, so got the soldering iron over there. It'll heat up. I'll get to 350. And that is all ready to start removing that charging point. Just rubbing off all the old solder, making sure the tip's nice and clean. So what he's doing is he's just putting on some solder wick, some chip wick, just putting it on top, rubbing it all in. And what that does is that just mixes it in with the old solder on the board, under the actual charging point. And what they'll do is they'll just be able to slowly peel it back, and it'll come off bit by bit. So if we can get a better view on this. I'm obviously filming this all by hand today, so it might be a little bit unstable because there's a lot of moving around for this job, unfortunately. So it's just rubbing it and making sure it gets enough heat to pull it up without pulling any pads up, because if you start pulling up pads, it makes the job a massive nightmare. You have to then fix all those pads, which is not what we want. So just going over it. With this job, obviously it's very slow work, making sure that all the pads come off nicely and not actually tear. As you can see, slowly lifting it up bit by bit, not putting any force on the backhand, just letting the solder do all the work, and you can feel it gently coming up and releasing itself. Like I say, it's not an easy job. Soldering points on the airs are a nightmare. As you can see, that has come off nicely, and it's got all the soldering points all there. Obviously it's got the old solder on it now. We'll need to clean that up. Just cleaning off all the old solder on that, just so we can remove all the solder that's on the actual board itself. So again, we'll put some more on. So the flux just helps the solder move nicely, and what he's got is he's got a solder wick now, and he's just removing all the old solder, which cleans up those connectors nicely, takes off all the old solder on them, because we want to put new fresh solder on the actual connector. Like I said, this job is not very easy, and it's not something that most places do, just because it does take a long time to do, and it's not the easiest jobs, and you can do loads of damage by ripping off any one of those pads. So there we go. Put that back into place. Right, so now what we'll do is we'll just clean up all the old flux in it, just to remove all the flux on it, make sure it's nice and clean. So obviously just that way, when we put on the new charging point, it's all nice and clean, it can just sit down nicely, and we can move it around, because you'll need to move it around to get it into place. Obviously if you've got a lot of the old adhesive on it, it'll stick it in place and it'll be a lot harder to move it. We want to move it freely so we can put it into the right spot it needs to be in. Because as you can see, those very, very small, I don't know if we can get a better picture, there we go. They're very, very small little points, and you need to make sure all of those line up exactly with all the points on there, and obviously none of them crossing, because as soon as they cross, it'll stop the charging point from working. So we go, so I'll put some more flux on it now. Obviously with flux, it doesn't matter how much you put on, obviously you want to put more than less on. Okay, cool, we'll stand there. Anything? So just clean this tip again, make sure it's nice and clean. There we go. Yeah, don't really focus that well, but as long as you can see the silver on it, there you go. It's nice and clean. You don't want it black or any solder on there. Right, so it's just putting some more solder on there. And then you're just going to gently run over it. And all that's going to do is add solder to each one of those connectors. And with that flux, those solder points will just stay, they'll make little like domes on each little pad. And that's kind of what you want. So you can see there's silver on each pad, which just means now that each one of those has got a little dome on it, got a little bit of solder. So when we put the new dock on, that solder can seep through the actual points and will hold it into place, and make a connection for each pad. Alright, so got the new charging point, nice and new. Alright, so obviously, as normal, peel off all the little blue tabs. So there we go, and we'll just need to line that all up in place. So what we'll need now is we'll need the microscope. Microscope just so we can obviously put it in the right place and make sure those solder points are going on to each individual little tab. Because like I said, if you cross any of those over, it'll stop it from working. Or if it's not lined up properly, those pads won't actually solder down. Right. Try and get the best angle I can. Try and see if I can actually show you what it looks like. Okay, it's a bit bright, but you can see those solder points there. There we go. It's got domes on them. That's kind of what you want. Each one has a little dome on it. And we're going to solder all those to the new charging point. Okay. So what we're going to do now is just going to put it on top. And you're just going to line it up. Just make sure it's all lined up. And he's going to put some flux on the top of it, just in the corner, just so what he's doing is getting the one corner, one little pad on it just lined up and soldered on, so then you can line up the other side properly. Right, at the moment the board's moving a little bit too much, causing too much wiggle, so we're just going to tape it back down a little bit more, just so it stops moving around. Because obviously you're working with tiny little solder points there. The more the board moves around, the harder it will be to just put one little point in place. Right, so here we go. Through the scope, he's looking at each one of those little points, and he's just getting the end one lined up. Because what they do on each charging point and on the board itself, it's got a little square on either side which will line up on the charging point. So either side you'll know that they're both lined up. So he's done the one side, just done one of the chips, one of the connectors. He's going to put some more flux on the other side. And then he's going to line that up and do one point on that side as well. just so you've got one point on each side, and then you can do the rest because it's all nicely lined up and all the other points should completely connect. There we go, just making sure that it's all nicely nicely lined up. Because that's the last thing you want, is it to not line up properly. If it doesn't line up properly, you're going to have to redo the whole entire job again. Okay. So there we go, it looks like it's all lined up. So now he's doing each one. So what you'll do now is you'll go over each little bit, one by one. Just gently put the solder point down onto the actual connector, and it'll just soak all the solder through the connector to the other side and hold it in place, and obviously make connection. And we'll do this gently, one by one, making sure every single little point is connected up, because you've got one of those that aren't connected up properly and the charging point won't work. Just bit by bit. Like I said, for all this to be done without an actual microscope, it's a lot harder of a job. Obviously you can still do it, it is just not the easiest, and you might not line it up properly. And like I said, if you don't line it up properly, it won't work and you could cause more problems. So it's not an easy job, it's not something you can just do at home, it's something you need a little bit more equipment for. But that's one of the reasons why we're here. We don't mind. We love doing this type of thing. There we go. So it's just going over it all, making sure that each one is definitely connected up. There we go. So what he's doing now is adding just a little bit more solder, making sure it's nice and clean. So you add solder, then clean it with a metal brush. It just cleans off all the solder on it, make sure the tips are nice and clean again. Because you've got a clean tip, it does a better job, you can get more heat to it. So you're just going to go over it again with a little bit more flux and a little bit more solder. What you want is the solder to soak all the way through, and when you made the balls on the actual board itself, sometimes those balls don't go all the way through. So what you want to do is you just want to add a little bit more solder on the top of it, just to make sure that it makes connection with the actual board. Obviously you don't want to add too much solder, because if you add too much solder, they'll start connecting underneath. Obviously it's not something you can see from the top, but if they start connecting underneath, you're going to cause a short in it. Obviously the charging point won't work then. So add a little bit of solder to the top, obviously only if you can see that the solder that you've put on before hasn't gone through. There we go. So there we go, soldering job done. So what we'll do now is we'll just clean up all the old flux on it, just so that way you can then look down the scope, make sure that all the points are connected, everything's nicely lined up, and obviously it's all clean. So there you go. That's all nicely done. We'll go down the top again, see if we can have a quick look. There we go. Light is a bit of a nightmare. Where's that light? There we go. Right, there we go. As you can see all the solder has come nicely through and they're all connected. Right, there we go. Turn it back up. Right, so now we'll move it over here again. We'll take off all the tape so we can just turn the board around. We can connect up a battery, try the charging port again, and make sure it's all charging. Right, so we'll get the battery, put it in place, make sure that's connected up. We'll plug in the charging point. Right. And now you can see it's reading 1.43. So here we go. Try it the other way as well, just to make sure both sides are charging. There we go, it's just booting up. There we go. It's booted up and that's charging nicely again. So that has been a successful charging point change on an iPad Air 1. Nice. Alright, brilliant. So obviously that was a soldering job. Not one of the easiest to do. Obviously, like I said, you do need a microscope for it as well. You need a soldering iron. Heat station you don't always need. That was just to remove the little bit of plastic covering the points, but it just makes taking off that without tearing it a lot easier. Like I said, it is a nice job, nice simple job, but it's pretty hard to do without the right equipment. Obviously that's all charging now. What we'll do is we'll put that board back into the iPad, seal it all up, test it again, make sure it's 100%, and that will all be done. Brilliant. So obviously any questions, any comments, anything you'd like to know, please list them down and comment under the section. Obviously if not, if you'd like to get your charging point changed or you'd like any other repair from us, you're more than welcome to private message us and we'll get back to you. Brilliant. Thank you very much. This has been Damien from Spark Angels, and I'll see you on the next video.